first and foremost, I want to thank you yourself and the ECIS team for bringing us all together here today. And, I was just thinking, how am I going to start? Of course, I'm going to do the introductions of two individuals that I have so much respect for, and I call them my friends, my mentors. But we've invited you all to the table. And a lot of times when we talk about belonging, it's you're invited to the table, but what is that experience like? And I hope you reflect on that statement, and we'll revisit that later on. It is my honor to introduce you all to Nunana Naomi and Loretta Fernando Smith. We'll start with Nunana. Nunana, I'm in awe of you. I've taken some of your courses. I see you as my mentor, and of course also my friend. Nunana is really passionate about developing communities where everyone can thrive as their full selves and helping students find career paths which allow them to fulfill their potential. Nunana currently serves as university advisor and DIJ coordinator at Lausanne American School in Switzerland. And he is also going to be the incoming principal at the International School of Geneva at the the Campus de Nation in Geneva. So that's really exciting. Additionally, Nunana served as the CIS Global Citizenship Team and on a special CIS board committee on inclusion through diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, also known as IDEA. He also previously led international student admissions at Calvin University in the US. Loretta, I actually heard Loretta first at the ALOC virtual conference, and I was just like, oh man, she is my kind of person. I was so inspired from her session that I was like, okay, I gotta follow her, on LinkedIn. I tried looking at her up on Twitter, and I was like, not in a creepy way, of course, but I was just like, the words of wisdom that I got from that one session, I was just like in complete awe. Loretta is a teacher with more than 20 years of experience in international schools. She grew up between cultures, moving several times during her childhood. She's also the mother of two multiracial, cross-cultural kids. Her experiences of straddling several cultures as a child, adult, parent, and educator have made her aware of how people navigate belonging in different spaces. She is currently enjoying 4- and 5-year-olds at the International School of Frankfurt International School. And for myself, I am an international school educator. I teach science at the Intercommunity School of Zurich. I have taught EAL. I used to be the head of department for learning support. I actually started my career as a French teacher for kindergarten students. So eventually I became a TOK teacher for grade 11 and 12. Crazy. But I also tried to keep a connection with the community. So I have done work with UNICEF, as well as I was an invited speaker at the United Nations Human Rights Council talking about racial profiling in Switzerland. So let's get started. The first question that I'd like to start us off with is, how has your own journey through the education system shaped your understanding of belonging in international schools? So Nunana, do you want to get us started?
Sure, and thanks for the wonderful introduction, Yasmine. Such a pleasure to be here, and it was great to also see you in person, 3D, as Nancy was talking about earlier. Yeah, so my own journey. I went to mostly British patterned schools. I'm a third culture kid, grew up in 5 different countries. And what shaped me with that third culture kid upbringing was that feeling of always being an outsider, being the other in a community, and having to figure out, okay, what's my place? How do I fit here? And often the messages that I got was, you need to speak a certain way, or act a certain way, or kind of almost assimilate, was kind of the answer. And through that, I had, I lost certain aspects of myself. For example, my mother tongue, which is Ewe. I can understand it fluently, but it's not something that I really speak well because it wasn't valued. So I didn't necessarily kind of invest in that. My parents tried with me as one of those stubborn kids who was like, no, I want to speak English because that's what everybody else speaks. And so kind of pushing that kind of narrative. Later in my career, went to boarding school in the UK, and it was all about kind of pro-British kind of narrative of, Britain first, above everything else in terms of the messages that I was getting through my education. And again, having to figure out, what's my place within that, having come from a British colony, and what does that mean for me? So thinking through those aspects and having to navigate that and find my own sense of self was an important part of my journey. Probably one of the most impactful things for me was when I hit the university level, where I actually lived on a multicultural living and learning community, where it was kind of half Caucasian students, half students of color. And we were supposed to start discussing issues of racism, issues of belonging. What does this look like? Start to think about what anti-racism is. Before Ibrahim X. Kendi already, popularized that phrase about, it's not about being not racist. You actually need to be anti-racist. You actually need to be proactive about it. And that was a key kind of learning for me, and a guide towards how I then kind of pursued my career. So whether it was in university admission, thinking about access and opportunity, and thinking about how do we provide those avenues, or working with my time at CIS, not just focused on delivering products and events, but also how do we make sure that everyone is seen, valued, and heard in our systems. And now, of course, working in international schools, really looking at things through that equity lens. So I'd say that my upbringing certainly has played a huge role in kind of informing my own approaches to belonging.
Great. It's really interesting because, when I think about my own upbringing, and where I am actually today, I've only been to international schools. My whole education has been in international schools. And it's interesting that you say that, when you're actually in your school setting, that you didn't really feel like yourself. And it's funny because I used to always say I'm Canadian. And just to see people's reactions, because I know there's a lot more to me, right? I'm like, no, I'm Canadian. But I don't know, where are you really from? I'm like, no, I'm Canadian. Just to see people's reactions, and be like, no, but where are your parents born? I'm like, well, that's even more complicated. Because, I think about the colonialism, and, how the Indian subcontinent was colonized, and how my parents migrated to different, to Africa, and then then into the UK, and then to Canada. It's just like, no. I'm Canadian. And it just stumps people, but Lorna, what about yourself?
Yeah, so very, very similar to yourself and Nunanu too. I grew up between cultures. I was born in Sri Lanka, but my family fled the Civil War and came to Germany, which is where I grew up as a refugee. And then my family immigrated to Canada. So I have a Canadian passport. So when people ask me where I'm from, I often say Canada as well, and often get the same kind of questions. And again, grew up in different sort of education systems. And throughout those education systems, the experience was also one of teachers wanting to integrate you, help you fit in, and teach you certain things to help you be more like them and the people around you. But I never really thought about that consciously. I think me just tried to fit in and tried to dress a certain way, tried to talk a certain way. And again, my parents helped me with that whole narrative of who I was by giving me a very Western name to start off with. And so certain things were easier for me. It wasn't until I think I had my own children who are also multiracial growing up within the whole international system. And if you've ever worked with young children, they can ask some of the most insensitive questions, it seems like, and they'll just ask you, right? They have no qualms about it. Why are you so dark? No, how can that be your dad? That doesn't make sense. And it's realizing that, realizing my reaction to those questions and how I would put my guards up. And it was only when I had my own kids who started asking certain questions and were having certain experiences and questioning those experiences that I started to sort of see the discrepancies in my world and who I had become. And that was when I started to actively go on a journey of self-discovery and sort of decolonize myself. And it's a journey that I am still on and probably will be on for the rest of my life, because I realized that I wanted different for my kids than what I had. I want them to be on this journey right from the start, rather than at middle age trying to figure it out. And then I think the other thing that really shaped my understanding of belonging in international schools is from these questions and these experiences that I was having with my 4- and 5-year-olds. I decided to do a master's through research on young children's perceptions of belonging in ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse international school settings. So that just listening to the wisdom of 4- and 5-year-olds on what belonging means and how we can access, or what sometimes stops us from belonging in these very diverse settings, was just really inspirational. And yeah, so it's all of those things that have sort of shaped my understanding of belonging and how I try to show up in different spaces now.
It's interesting that you point out decolonizing, right? And we hear about that a lot amongst, you got to decolonize the curriculum. And when I think about decolonizing, I remember my grandmother telling me that, they moved from, have Kashmiri background, and then, we're actually Punjabi from India, and then we migrated to Lahore in Pakistan. And so, linguistically, I speak Punjabi really, really like quite fluently. And the reason why I speak so fluently is because my grandmother, when they migrated to the UK, the teachers used to say, you should be speaking English at home. And this, why? And it's that those small moments of resistance, that she said, well, no, I'm gonna uphold that identity. And they were fortunate enough to do that. And so when I look at my own child, and he can actually understand and speak a little bit of Urdu as well as Punjabi, but it's interesting when you think about decolonizing. It's a lot deeper than just, oh, let's bring in a variety of sources. It's like really looking at where those roots actually come from. Yeah, thank you so much, Nunana and Laura. It's really insightful. Now I'm going to share a link to a Menti, and I forgot to mention this earlier on. I do have an interactive whiteboard that I am collating the main themes that we are discussing. So I'm going to add the link into the chat box right now, and you all have access. So if you want to add your comments to it as well, you may. Go. It's in the chat box. And so what we would like you all to think about is what are the themes that we're discussing? What are the gifts we will cherish? And then what is the wisdom we will continue to reflect on? And later on in the session, we'll have a 10-minute breakout, and that could be something that you can, the gifts and the wisdom you take from our discussion, you can actually discuss within the breakouts. And if the formatting gets adjusted, don't worry. I have a complete setup here, so I can see where people are adding things, and if the formatting gets ruined, don't worry, I'll fix it. So I am going to now share my screen, and we had Nancy had shared out a survey and the silent reflection for our session. I'm going to share my screen. I'd like you all to vote on the prompt, which is, can we create a sense of belonging without justice? And I'll present to you all the responses that we got from everyone, perhaps who are not here right now as well. So here's the link, and I will share my screen. Okay, so you can take a moment to vote on the prompt. So yes, belonging can be fostered independently of justice. No, justice is a prerequisite for creating true belonging. And you're going to rank these statements. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. So it looks like, yes, we have a tie between achieving true belonging requires addressing systemic injustices. Belonging without justice may lead to superficial unity rather than genuine inclusivity. Both belonging and justice are essential components of a thriving community. Yeah, cool. I'll give you a few more seconds to put in your vote. Great. Okay. And we'll move right along. So it looks like, we have a bit of a tie between, both belonging and justice are essential components of a thriving community, as well as achieving true belonging requires adjusting systemic injustices. Cool, very cool. Well, I also want to give voice to those individuals who took the time to actually fill out the Google form that was shared out a few weeks ago, and then along with the link to the session. So I'm going to stop the voting now, and just to give them voice as well, is that, 83.3% of the individuals said, achieving true belonging requires adjusting systemic injustices. However, there was an individual as well who said that creating a sense of belonging without justice can be challenging. However, it is still possible to work towards creating a sense of belonging in other ways. And that's really interesting. I want to point out that there is a journal article that was published not so long ago. I can't remember the year, but I'm happy to share any research that I share with you all. Please do call me up on today. It's not a problem. But the journal article was published by the Australian Journal of Psychology, and there was a framework that was presented on belonging, a review of conceptual issues on integrative frameworks. And within that journal, it talked about how you take into consideration the competencies as well as opportunities that you create within a school community, as well as perceptions and motivations. But using that framework, you can actually devise customized strategies to address that sense of belonging, but also taking into consideration the social, cultural, and environmental experiences as well within your school community. But yeah, something to think about for sure. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go into the next question, which is, what are the biggest challenges in creating belonging in international schools, and what are potential solutions? So Laura, let's get you started with this question.
Yeah, sure. I think, when you're in an international school system or in any sort of system at all, and there is this need for DIJB work, people are like, okay, let's create a Google Doc. Let's put a ton of resources in there. Let's get some checklists going so we can check off and we can say we're doing this, right? And unfortunately, I don't think it works that way. I think in order to create true belonging, we need to start with ourselves. And educators need to start with that self-work as well. I think it's a lot of identity-centered teaching, and you really need to explore who you are so that you can understand how you're coming to the classroom and reading that book. That might be a great resource, and how that is hitting and impacting the children or the other adults in your setting. I love this quote, like, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And so I think it's difficult, but it's important to start with that self-work of recognizing where you are kind of coming from and doing that work. So yeah, I think that is, for me, one of the biggest kind of takeaways, especially in sort of systems where children might not see themselves reflected in the faculty and staff. And so I think being able to sort of just take on that other perspective, I think is just really, really important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Perspective is very, very important, and it's also, sometimes I reflect on the term perspective. And really, I also feel that it's also the narratives as well that we share amongst each other, and it's not just looking, but it's also feeling, like getting that full holistic understanding of where people come from, what are the stories they bring. You may not actually understand what in the world they're talking about, but it's like really hearing those stories. And in fact, like, our brains are hardwired to, when you tell a story, it's different than just reading about it. The emotional side of your brain gets activated, like your amygdala is like, woohoo, it's like, oh, wow, like our brains like it, and we start absorbing a lot more when we share narratives, I suppose. It's just like kind of like looking into
There's
it.
this beautiful quote by Richard Macy, who is a Canadian author, and he talks about how, you know, at the end of the day, it's not the things that we've accumulated. We are all at the end of the day story. And so what comes to matter the most is the creation of the best possible story with you, me, and us together, right? And so I think that's so important. I think you also hit it beautifully, this whole idea of perspective, always approaching it with curiosity. I think that's one of the most important things that we can nurture in ourselves and our learners, curiosity. To look at the world and others with curiosity and just a sense of generosity rather than maybe a judgment or I already understand, I already know.
Nunana, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have a couple different thoughts on this perspective. I certainly completely agree with what's been shared about it, starting with yourself in terms of being able to create that. And I think in terms of that self-work, one thing that I've been saying for quite a while now is that for me, when I look at the challenge in creating belonging, a lot of it centers around fear. A lot of it comes back to, maybe it's a fear of, how are people going to judge me if I share things a certain way? Or for administrator, are we going to go viral on social media if we say the wrong thing or do the wrong issue? Like it's all this kind of fear-based decision making, which then means we stay in our comfort zone. We're like, okay, let's just keep it comfortable and stay with the things that are politically correct and not kind of delve deeper into people's identity issues or challenges or whatever, because we're scared where that discussion might go. I might lose the classroom. What if they, go in this way or that way? But by staying in that fear zone, then we're not actually actively engaging with aspects that might be really important for people on the margins, or giving them that space to have a voice. And yes, when you give somebody a voice, they might bring perspectives that might be different, that might be jarring, that might put you on the spot in a certain way. But that's part of the learning experience. It's flipping the idea of what learning is. It's not just about the teacher to the student, but it's actually as a whole community. Maybe the students have something to teach us about their experience, which then also helps everyone figure out, okay, how do we create a community in which everyone is feeling a sense of belonging, place, celebration of who they are in themselves, comfort in their own skin. So to me, addressing those fears, isolating what are those beliefs that are kind of holding us back, and then kind of finding ways to attack those. I found kind of things like, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques actually to be quite useful in that area. So really thinking about it almost like a psychologist would, both on the individual level, but also even looking organizationally around that. What are those fears and trying to attack those? But the other thing for me that I'm also inspired by is Michelle Mi-Jung Kim's book, The Wake Up. And in that book, she talks about kind of 3 different ways of looking at the work of equity and inclusion. One of them is this idea of, saying, let's do it because it's the right thing to do. And if you do it because it's the right thing to do, it sounds great, like that's what you should do. But the problem is it kind of creates the saviorist mentality. Like, I'm the one who's going to come in here and we're going to save these poor people who are struggling, these poor neurodivergent people, these poor Black people, or whatever it is, we need to come in there and save them because it's the right thing to do. But the thing is, as soon as you're on the line, that you have to choose between your own personal safety or your own issue and that of someone else's suffering, then suddenly it's like, actually, that was cool, but actually, I think I'm gonna just stay and I think you're on your own for that one. So that only goes so far. Then there's other people say, well, let's do it because it's good for business. You see this with the McKinsey and Company studies and things like that that are like, oh, if you go out there and if we create diverse teams, they're going to be so productive. But they miss the part that it actually takes a while to storm, to norm the practices, people come from different perspectives and so on. And as soon as that starts becoming a challenge, then some schools say, you know what, this is too hard. We can't do it. Let's go back to the way it used to be when things were so much more efficient because we all did things one way, and freeze people out who the system doesn't work for. And where she kind of suggests so we should go is kind of going more in a direction that's focused on inclusion as something where your liberation is bound in mind, where we are seeing ourselves as a common humanity. And so to me, that's, if we're trying to overcome the challenge of belonging in schools, that's where we need to be, the mindset of we're all human beings, and we are, in order for me to be my fullest self as a human being, I can't be until you're also fully liberated. And as long as we're in that space of operating and saying, are people fully liberated in our community? And if the answer is still no, then we still have work to do. And it's trying to get schools to be in that space of thinking around belonging. And that's what I see as a challenge, is most of them are stuck in other phases, the business phase or the right thing to do phase, and trying to get them more into that liberation phase.
That's deep. To like process that a bit, you know, that's, you know, there's so, you said so many, touched on so many interesting points. Absolutely. You know, I think about my own personal journey with being a former international school student as well, you know, and, you know, recently I you know, as a teacher, I just don't only do my work in the school, you know, I also work within my community. And a few years back, I got a chance to work with the Women's March. I'm sure many of you have heard that. They came out of a movement out of the United States. And I actually got involved here in Zurich. And a lot of times I'm like, you know what, I need to bring in the Muslim woman's perspective, you know, the woman in the headscarf perspective. And one of the things that the movement in Switzerland, what they had shared, it was that, you know, their Women's March hat nicht ein Gesicht, sondern viele. In other words, in German, it's like, you know, Women's March or women in general are not just one face, but there are many. There's that intersectional identity that we all bring to the table, you know. And so I got involved, you know, and I had all my teacher friends with me on the event. And what happened was the organizers like, well, you should be at the front with us. And I'm like, oh, no, you know, that's problematic. I don't know if I should be. It's like, no, you're coming. And all my teacher friends are like, yeah, go for it. I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do this, you know. I'm in the front. And little did I know, me being in the front would have been so problematic. And it was really interesting because when we say that we're all intersectional, we have our identity, unique identities, we really have to believe it. You know, sometimes we say it, there's lip service, but then there's the action involved as well. So, you know, so in our schools, when we say, oh, we're inclusive, I think about Shelley Moore. You know, I don't know if many of you know who Shelley Moore is. She's Canadian as well. She's done a lot of work on inclusion, particularly for neurodivergent individuals. And she said that, you know, like, for example, special education, it's very much a specialist role. You bring in the specialist into the classroom, and the specialist goes in there and tries to help the student. But instead, maybe we should be taking it as a socialist approach, where the community comes together to help the students, and not just the specialist who comes in and works with the child or the students on the side and then they leave. But yeah, but that it's really important that when we talk about community, there's a sense that you have to create that sense of unity as well. So yeah, just a thought.
You know, I just want to add a thought that, based upon putting your thoughts together, someone had insightful, and someone else as well, the concept of psychological safety. I think it goes back to Nunana, what you were saying, that being is that fear. And if we had that psychological safety, then perhaps you would be able to move forward and not being feared of being criticized or humiliated, that you do have that element of trust, which I think that comment relates to what you were saying, Nunana, about, you know, just facing it. You know, we're just doing that, what it looks like it should be, you know, what schools are saying on their mission statements, on their websites. And I love what you said, Loretta, about the inner self, starting with your inner self. So thank you. That comment that was in the chat, I thought I'd share that with you.
Great. So I guess the next question that we'd like to address is, so many times we talk about belonging, assuming we all mean the same thing. What does belonging mean to you? Laura, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So like when I talked about my whole experience in shaping my understanding of belonging, I talked about how I was part of different educational systems that really tried to make me more of who they were, right? And I think when I went into the classroom as an educator, I saw my goal in terms of teaching children how to read and write. And unfortunately, very early in my sort of education career, I would say things like, oh, at school we speak English, you know, can you repeat that in English to me again? And I was repeating those same patterns that I had kind of grown up with. I was trying to make children fit in and assimilate and be more like who I was in the dominant culture. But I think since then, it's really shifted. And one of the things that the kids really kind of grappled with in the research that I did was, does belonging mean fitting in and being like everyone else, or does belonging mean like really being yourself? And in the end, they decided that belonging, true belonging, really meant being yourself. And things that, you know, I, as a 40-year-old woman, was reading about in Brene Brown, my 4-year-olds very clearly was like, to really, truly belong, you have to be able to be yourself and show up as who you are. And so I think, to me, in sort of schools and the education system, belonging is really about helping children see themselves and find out who they are and help them become more of who they are, rather than of more of who we are and who we want them to be.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I love how you put that, Loretta. Definitely, it's about who you are. It's about being seen, what I like to say, comfortable in one's own skin, being your full, authentic, unabashed self, untethered, unshackled, full confidence in every aspect of who you are. I think our communities are stronger for that, when everyone can show up and not have to feel that they're holding something back, that they're having to hide an aspect of themselves or conform in a specific way. So it's creating the environment. What our schools should be doing is creating environments where our students and our staff can show up fully as themselves, having that psychological safety that was pointed to as well. That's the responsibility of our schools.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel that, you know, we're kind of talking about Maslow's hierarchy of self-actualization. And it's really interesting because, you know, when you really look at Maslow's hierarchy, you know, his actual research was just looking at how to self-actualize, how to achieve your full potential, you know. But I also want to add on, you know, and belonging is obviously there, is one of the levels within his tier system. But you know, it's the importance of making those connections as well. You know, in preparation for this session, what I did is that I made a list of all the teachers that I had from preschool all the way till I graduated from high school. Because, you know, I'm like, okay, I am the international school student. So I sat down and had about 60 teachers in the US. And of the 60 teachers, 2 were people of color. Only 2. And I went to international schools across the Middle East. You know, I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in boarding school in Bahrain, I went to the UK, I was in Houston, Texas. That was an outlier, but I came back to Saudi Arabia. And then I've never really done that. When you make that list, only 2 people of color, and they weren't even from the same background as myself. You know, there were, you know, I think one was, it came from the Middle East, and another teacher, actually both came from the Middle East. And so, and they were my Arabic teachers, because we learned Arabic as a second language, a foreign language in school. And I'm like, that speaks volumes, you know. And we need to look at our own current school, international school communities and the staffing in terms of representation. Do we have an international representation amongst our staff? And to also question, where is the diversity on staff, and what message are you sending to the greater community? You know, if your diversity is only in the cafeteria staff, what are you imprinting in the mind of the student? Because that's what they're going to see. So, you know, it's definitely something to think about. You know, that, yeah, it's the psychological safety. Definitely, I'm wholeheartedly agree to that. Because making these connections, but also visually as well. Like, where is the representation? So, I don't know. What do you both think?
I think that's a great point that you make. And the good thing about working with 4 and 5-year-olds is they will point that out to you, you know? And so one of the things that happened to me that started off this whole research is we've got a giant poster of all the faculty and staff at our school hanging up outside our wall as we enter, and it's beautiful. And we walk past this poster every week when we go to the forest. And one of our walks, we're walking past this poster, and one of the little boys who was my forest buddy that day grabbed the hand and said to me, "You're too dark." And I was like, that's politically incorrect. Maybe you're just too white. You know, luckily I didn't say anything because I was like, we're about to cross the street. We will have this discussion later. And we walk past. But what he was really pointing out is like, are you too dark for this community? Because I noticed that you're the most melanated person in here right now. Can you fit in with the way that you look? And he is saying like, how does this fit in, right? And so as much as we put up beautiful posters or images or whatever we say, we're sending very strong messages about who belongs, what spaces they belong in, and how they can belong in the way that we hire people. And I think you make a really great point, Jasmine. Very often schools will put out statements that say, we've got faculty and staff of this much different nationalities. Where does that lie, right? Are they the assistants helping out? Because that sends a really important message too. And when you've got children from X many different nationalities in your classroom, it sends a clear message about where you can go and where you are welcome. So I think that's something we really need to explore. And the other thing I want to say is, real quickly, is we just had a panel discussion with some high school students who came and presented to our high school faculty and staff about equity, justice, and belonging at the school. And one of the things, these high school students, they were fantastic, but one of the things they said is that it is difficult to make those connections because they don't often see people that look like them. And so to, you know, when something like identity-based harm happens, to find somebody that's able to sort of understand and help you kind of coach through this. And so, yeah, I think it's a great point you make.
Nana, what's your from the male perspective? What insights can you share?
Yeah, so I think speaking from the male perspective, I think that intersectionality word is so important when we talk about this work. So for example, we're now talking about, if we talk about gender inclusion, you know, we'll often talk about the gender pay gap. And, you know, of course, that's important. And of course, we need to look at hiring. There's clear things that are going on. You look at the percentage of women that are teachers, it's probably like 70% in most country systems in the world. Then you look at leadership positions. I think there's a recent study from ISS, and they were like, okay, it's more like 50% male to female. Or you look at the actual gender pay gap. CIS did a study for heads of school, and it's like $25,000 difference between male and female. But then once you add ethnicity on top of that, it's $45,000. You know, so it's, you know, thinking about things not just as somebody's one story, but really thinking about, you know, how does that show up within the community? Who are the individuals that are getting raised up? And what are we doing to create those spaces and being intentional about it, and tracking the right data, the right information. So I think all too often it's very easy to say, oh yes, you know, we're doing great work in this area. You know, look at all these ways that we've addressed it. But it's all on the kind of food flags festivals, the easy stuff that's kind of on the tip of the iceberg, and not doing the deeper systemic work and saying, what is our hiring policies around this? And it's not about eliminating bias, but it's actually about recognizing people's differences and saying, we need to step into new spaces. We need to network differently. We need to kind of expand our horizons. So I think that's a key piece. And I would say also from male perspective, it's also taking a step back and kind of listening more, and saying, you know, what other perspectives need to be empowered in here? Because in the male situation, it's often, I'm getting that advantage of being able to get the microphone to say things or whatever, but who isn't? Who should be sponsored into this space? Who should be the one put in front of people to to share that message and so on, and thinking about those intersections of identities that are not being represented and putting them in the limelight as well, and not just relying on the narrative that, oh, you know, whatever the traditional line of experience is exactly what somebody should have. Maybe it's not a single story, as Chimamanda Adichie says. And so realize that there are other stories, there are other ways of doing things that need to also be valued as well.
Absolutely, you know, and once one time someone told me, you know, oh, I don't see color. I'm like, oh my goodness, then I'm just a blank slate. You know, I'm like, well, you don't see color? I mean, come on, I purposely color coordinate, you know, with my clothes. How can you not see color? You have to see color, you know? And you know, the first time I heard that comment, I was like, what? I was like, that sounds it sounds so wrong, you know? And I kind of often reflect on you know, that whole concept of, you know, when we talk about decolonizing the curriculum again, I know I keep coming back to that, you know, but, you know, like, what are the histories and stories that we're sharing, right? And a lot of times, okay, I come from the Indian subcontinent, you know, but, you know, we talk about, you know, how the British Empire divided and conquered, and you know, how they removed the histories of that we don't really have access to. And it wasn't actually a concept from the British Empire. It was actually a concept fostered by the ancient Romans. It was actually called damnatio memoriae. That was a condemnation of memory. You know, like, how can we erase that aspect of a civilization, so that way they're always questioning. They're always questioning, where am I really from? I am very conscious of time, you know, and I think we had a question in the chat, Danya. Yeah, absolutely. Don't you think belonging is a luxury to some of the people, some of us around the world? And yeah, absolutely. You know, the passport sometimes has the power. Unfortunately, that is a luxury that some of us have that privilege to. Okay, I want to make sure I give everyone the chance to speak amongst each other within your breakout rooms. And I want to make sure that you have 10 minutes, hopefully. Maybe we make it 8, so that way we can do the close. And I will share my screen one more time. And also the link to the interactive board, which I will share right now, and share my screen. And I have been adding to this as much as I can. And so Nancy, we're ready for our breakout. And as you're in your breakout rooms, I've added as much as I could. It's kind of hard when you're kind of listening and trying to paraphrase what everyone is saying. But in your breakout rooms, what are some gifts that you know we will cherish from this discussion? The wisdom that we will continue to reflect in. So maybe that's a discussion you all have within your breakout rooms, as well as, or maybe something that you'd like to add yourself. So we're ready for our breakout. Hey, thank you so much for, I hope you all had a fruitful discussion in your breakout rooms, and I'm very conscientious of time, and I want to quickly do a quick summary of the discussions that we've had. So about belonging, just about fitting into a predetermined mold or conforming to societal norms. It's about recognizing a sense of belonging. Now, the title was "You Got the Power." It's not just a catchy phrase, but it's a reminder that
Yasmine, I think you're freezing. Nunana or Loretta, can you hear Yasmine?
I think she's frozen.
I think, Nunana, would you mind summing up our?
Sure, I'll give it a good shot. So yeah, you know, we obviously have been talking quite a bit around kind of belonging in schools, and the importance of course, trying to create communities where we are free from fear, where we are really trying to look at how do we make sure those people who are on the margins, those collectives, areas of kind of oppression within our societies, how do we make sure that they feel seen? How do we make sure that they contribute well? And so ultimately for us as educators, as we leave today, hopefully you've had time within your workshop groups to also engage with this and think about this, but then also start to think about what's that first step? What is that little piece that we can do? Because often we feel like this is so difficult, it's so large, we can't get there. But if we all can take one step, we can easily move things much further than we might even expect. So I think to me, that would be the biggest kind of takeaway for yourselves, is that we all have work to do in this. We have self-work to do, and then we also have systems work to do within our communities around what we can change and what we can impact. So
Beautiful. Thank you, Nana. And Loretta, one final word before we go. Thank you, Nana. Your final thoughts before we go.
My final thoughts. As Nona was talking about fear and how much fear holds us back, fear of doing the wrong thing, fear of upsetting someone, fear of creating a bigger, larger problem. I'm an early years teacher, so I thought of Little Crab, and I thought of the little dedication at the very front of the book, and it's by Anais Nin, and he says, if life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And so I wish you courage, curiosity, connection, to go out there and to be your true selves and to help others find that comfort in that as well.
Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your insight. I hope next year we're going to get Nana and Loretta back to continue this conversation, but sending you much gratitude from Luxembourg for just being here today. Everyone, you can unmute and say goodbye and just wave. Can everyone unmute? And
Thank
goodbye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Sending you much love, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.